The wire found her before he did. Silas Granger saw the gray snag on the wind-swept bench, left his team standing, and climbed the drift. Barbed wire had bitten a woman to a corner post. Snow stitched shut what breath she had left. 3 bundles. "Lay in the lee, small as bread loaves, ma'am," he said, voice low. "You're coming with me." Her eyes opened, hard sky color, the look of one who saves words for when they count. He cut the wire with fencing pliers, left twist, careful. The last barb let go with a dry, mean sigh. He wrapped his scarf around, her shoulders and his coat over that, then reached for the first bundle. It made a sound too small for a coyote to hear and too large for a decent man to ignore. He peeled back the flannel. A girl, red as new iron, fists up, mouth certain. The second made the same claim, and the third, smaller but as decisive as the others. Frost rhymed their breath to proof. 3, he said to the morning. All. Right then. The woman's lips tried on words and chose the right ones. "Don't let them die." "They won't," Silas said. "Not while I have rope and hands." He made a sling from his bedroll and set 2 of the babies skin close against him, tucked under his shirt where heat belongs. He put the third in, the crook of the woman's arm, and cinched her to him with his blanket, so the wind could not argue. He lifted her, light as a bird bone, and went down the slope with steps you could count for patience. The team took him in without complaint. Silas set the woman on the fence post sled, tucked the babies in wool and canvas, and spoke to the mules like kin. They leaned into their traces and gave him back to timber. At the cab he shouldered the door, let the cold fall off him like an argument, and set about the business of living. Fire first, because heat is a kind of mercy. He laid, kindling coaxed flame, and warmed a pot. He found condensed milk kept for hard weather, thinned it with boiled water, and poured it into the rubber nipple he had carved when a neighbor's calf came early one spring. He set the woman, girl, though the last day had aged her, on his bed, and propped her with his extra coat. He eased the third child to her chest and kept a hand under the tiny skull until the mouth found what it needed. The other 2 took the warm milk and blinked at him. Her hands stopped shaking. Her eyes traveled, the room counting, stove, table, shelf, door bar, man. On the third pass they settled on the bar. "You set that," Silas said. "Whenever you please." She lifted a hand that had been a fist and laid it on the nearest infant's back. "Name?" he asked, because names are the corners of a life. She swallowed. "Maribel," she said. "Quinn." The last word came out flat and cold. Silas nodded once, not because he approved of the second name, but because a person gets to say it before they change it. "I'm Silas Granger," he said. "This ridge takes that name because I've outlasted more winters than sense says I should." She tried to pull herself up on pride alone. The babies complained. Silas set his palm to the air between them, without touching what wasn't his. "Easy," he said. "We'll talk after hot broth and asleep." He melted snow, washed his hands the way an army surgeon had taught him, checked the wrists where the barbs had argued, cleaned them, and wrapped them in soft cotton. "Who did this?" he asked. Not for drama, for the ledger a man keeps when law is far. She looked at the door, then at the girls. "My husband," she said. "Joseph Quinn, he wanted a son." Silas looked at the 3 proofs that the world hadn't taken his advice. "The land gives what it gives," he said. "A man who puts a brand on a cradle isn't fit to keep stock." He set a kettle to bone broth from a jar saved for storms, tore linen into narrow bands for the babies' bellies, and warmed stones for the bed's foot. He showed Maribel the bar again, and she set it with a final sound. "You're safe here," Silas said, "until you say otherwise. After that we'll make new sentences." Maribel closed her eyes. The babies slept with the trust of creatures who have no choice but to believe. Silas sat with his hat off and counted the breaths, changed the day, from foundering to afloat. The ridge listened and decided to keep its snow where it was. The stove learned their names before the town did. Silas banked the fire until it held like a hand. He warmed stones in the oven, rolled them in flannel, and set them at the bed's foot where chill gathers. The 3 babies, red, indignant, alive, answered heat with the ancient work of swallowing. He tipped the spoon slowly. The smallest paused to remember being born, and then chose to go on. Maribel watched everything as if the room might lie. Her wrists wore white ghosts where barbs had argued. He offered willow bark and honeyed water. She sipped and let breath find its gate. "You're safe here," he said. "All four." "How long does safe last?" Her voice was the sound a lantern makes when the wick is trimmed too tightly. "As long as it takes to mend what men tried to break," he said. "After that, we set different doors." She looked at the door bar. She lifted it, felt its plane, gravity, and set it home. The sound steadied the room. He brought broth, salted carefully, cooled with patience. She finished it like a person who remembers manners even in a storm. "Tell me what you'll tell," he said. "No press in it, only space for truth." She studied the babies until the words lined up. "Joseph Quinn," she said. "Money enough to buy 2 counties' respect, and not a teaspoon of it earned. He married me for my father's land. I gave him a daughter. He gave me bruises where no dress could hide. Triplets came early. He looked at the 3 and laughed wrongly, said the sky had mocked him, told his men to fetch wire. They tied me to the corner post and left the girls at my feet, like a lesson." Her mouth made a shape that did not let crying through. "If he comes, he'll come talking law," she said. "He keeps a judge in his pocket like a watch." "I keep a sheriff beyond this ridge," Silas answered. "He keeps a horse that finds trouble by scent. Law isn't paper. It's people who refuse to let the paper lie." The smallest woke, with the startle that says life prefers noise. Silas tucked her into the crook of his arm and counted her breaths with his own. Maribel watched his hand, the square way it learned softness, and something behind her eyes sat down. "Food, shelter, pride," he said. "Those are the stakes. I can give the first 2 quickly. The third, we'll build together and take our time." "Why?" Her voice was not the question. The world was. Because a ridge is no use if it doesn't hold. The day narrowed to sensible tasks. He boiled linen, set pins to dry, shaped another rubber nipple with his knife's fine work, and draped the line by the stove. Maribel slept, in lean pockets between feedings. When fear tried the window, the bar answered with a modest no. Snow thickened toward afternoon. He stepped out and shoveled a load of wood into the woodpile, listening. The hill gave back only honest sounds. He carried in logs and stacked them where tomorrow could find them. Inside, he spoke in the small way that makes a house remember it is one. "Cups on this shelf, coats on that peg. The mule answers to chess because he never cheats." Maribel almost smiled. "He must be a Christian mule then." "Some days," Silas said. Twilight came early and asked to stay. He trimmed the wick and reached for the Bible by the stove. He did not thump. He opened where the thumb had taught it to open and read the part about widows and strangers. He did not look to see if she listened. He listened. When the babies slept in a truce signed with milk, he made space for the talk that mends a map. "What do you want called?" he asked. "Maribel," she said. "Not Mrs. Quinn. That name takes breath I need." "Maribel," he repeated, giving it a place to stand. "And the girls?" "They were born under a bad sentence," she said. "Let's not hurry their new ones." "We won't," he said. "Tonight they can be left middle and determined." She almost laughed, then saved it for later. "Determined belongs to the smallest. Determined it is." Wind swept the ridge once and conceded defeat. The stove ticked pride into the iron. Silas set another log and watched flame take it without complaint. "You're coming with me," he had said on the bench. He meant to keep saying it until with me meant with us, and with us meant home. Snow eased its grip. The ridge kept watch. The babies breathed small, certain breaths that counted time better than any clock. The night agreed to carry its part of the weight. Snow kept its counsel and stayed on the ridge. Silas woke to the hush a storm leaves when it has finished speaking. He checked the fire, the bottles warming at the stove's back, the 3 small chests rising inside his spare shirt. Maribel slept, in pieces, waking to give and falling back as if rest were in order. Light came blue through the window, sure and merciful. Day begins, he said, not hurrying it. He washed, trimmed the wick, and set oats to swell. The babies accepted heat in turn, left, middle, then determined, each announcing herself with the old honesty of hunger. A house learns its work by repetition. What lives on this ridge besides you? Maribel asked. Axe, sled, quiet mule, he said. Spring under the aspen and a neighbor who hears trouble before it clears its throat. She waited. Hattie Lorimer, he said. Wagon boss, when the church ladies forget who hauls their hymnals. A small smile nearly won her mouth. He placed a basin and showed how hot water softens grievous places. She did the plain work a body demands after birth. He faced the door and listened to the wind write smaller paths. When she finished, he tied bands around small bellies, his hand steady as a mason setting the first course. Tell me a thing that was yours before him, he said. Color on a wall, she said, and a table that didn't wobble. She eyed the shelf and bowls set square, and peaches put up in bright jars. We'll leave paint to spring, he said, but we can mend a table. He planned a cedar shim and slid it under the quarrelsome leg. The wobble resigned. Near noon, hoofbeats answered the hill. A sorrel stood blowing white. Hattie's red scarf cut the snow like a seal on a letter. She stepped in when Silas opened, thawing by the stove without ceremony. I smelled gossip hard enough to bite, she said, eyes taking in 4 facts, returning 1 conclusion. This is the right kind of noise. Maribel, came the answer. A baby hiccuped on time. Hattie unwrapped clean cloths and bread. I bring what talk forgets, she said. Then to Silas. Quinn rode through town with a slick mouth and bruised pride. Hired for and told Hale he'd collect his property. Sheriff's riding circuits till Saturday. Hale is washing his hands like Pilate. Maribel's fingers found the bar and held until the wood admitted she was stronger. He left us. To freeze, she said. Words that did not shake. He'll come calling it charity, Hattie said. Men like that hand you a cliff and name it a porch. Silas moved the rifle where it could reach him without making a point. They'll test the door, he said. Then swear to return with borrowed law. I came so you aren't standing alone when the knocking starts, Hattie answered. Every woman in 2 draws knows the difference between cradle and brand. If Hale pretends not to, his pies will arrive late and inedible. What do I do when they come? Maribel asked. Hold your girls, Hattie said. Let Silas do the unpleasant parts. He's got the posture for it. If words are needed, I keep a few. Snow ticked the window. Silas poured coffee and let the smell persuade winter. He set a small cedar board on the table. Not today, he said, but in time I'll carve name plaques. When a thing is named, the world has to reshape around the truth of it. Maribel touched the grain. Truth, she said, testing size. I wasn't allowed much. You are now, Hattie said, calm as a lane picker who knows the herd will follow right if the gate is sure. And you aren't alone. Silas warmed. Oven stones rolled them in flannel and nested them at the bed's foot where chill collects. He showed Maribel the sling he'd tied from canvas and how to tuck 2 and 1 higher so all 3 heard the same heartbeat. She listened, matched his hands with her own until the rhythm held without him. Day thinned toward its blue hour. Hattie tied her scarf. I'll be back before dark deepens, she said. If men arrive with Joseph first, keep your lamp low and your answers lower. She went, and the sorrel's hoofbeats stitched quietly back together. Silas checked the latch and bell string at the hinge. Maribel settled the babies crosswise against her like a fort that breathes. Threat announced, she said. No despair, only a ledger finally balanced. Then we answer with a house that knows its rules, Silas said. We will not be easy to move. The stove hummed approval. Outside, the ridge leaned into the evening. Inside, 4 small hearts and 2 larger. Ones learned each other's pace and made a weather of their own. They knocked with their hats still on. Silas did not open up to that. He stood where the bar met the jam and let the house hold its line. The stove kept small talk with the kettle. Maribel gathered the babies into the sling he had tied. 2, crosswise the small one high, and move to the bed's head back to the wall, eyes on the door. State your needs, Silas said. Joseph Quinn's property, a voice answered. Slick. Woman in 3. We'll take them off your hands and leave you to your soup. This house keeps people, Silas said. It doesn't trade them. Paper rustled. Affidavit, the voice said. Signed and stamped. Hattie's shadow filled the window before her hand rapped twice. Silas lifted the curtain a finger width. She tipped her scarf and stepped inside without wasting heat. Afternoon, gentlemen, she called, cheerful and flinty. We have seats, for shame. Coffee for men who come honestly. Who are you? The slick one asked. The person you'll complain about later, she said. A second voice tried authority. Open, or we'll open it for you. The first person through this door is choosing to limp, Silas said, mild as weather. If you're here for talk, talk. If you're here for theft, go fetch a better lie. Maribel lifted and set the bar again, reminding Wood and men both which side they belonged on. The babies breathed like warm punctuation. Quinn is a gentleman, the first voice said. He'll be obliged if you help him collect. A gentleman doesn't leave. A mother wired to a post, Hattie answered. That's coyote work with a collar. Silas could see them. 4, hats low, horses stamping at the notion of waiting. Last chance, the second voice said. Our paper's good. Paper that turns a person into freight isn't paper, Silas said. It's tinder. A third voice, older, cleared its throat. We're paid to ask, it said. We've asked. Let's go tell him the door is a door. Tell him something better, Hattie said. Tell him the ridge has a memory and a sheriff with a horse stabled on both sides of the law. He'll ride the right one when he hears this story true. Silas lifted the latch and cracked the door an inch so eyes could meet eyes. Cold, tried, his boots and failed. The men stood in a drift like bad punctuation. The oldest tipped his hat. The slick one did not. Look, Silas said, and stepped aside just enough to show the sling. One child making a fist, one asleep with her ear pressed to kin, one staring at the world with the calm of a litigant who plans to win. These are not a debt. They are the day after a bad one. The oldest man looked down. We'll tell him, he said quietly. The slick one glared at the snow as if it had chosen sides. We'll be back with the judge, he promised. Bring the sheriff, Silas said. Bring the preacher. Bring every woman who has worked. A cradle into the small hours. Bring the truth and you can all come in. They didn't like that sentence. They backed their horses and took the slope wrong, skidding once, swearing in a register that made the ridge grin. Hattie let out the breath that lets ribs remember. Doorstep test passed, she said. Only the first, Maribel answered. First is where we set how talking works, Hattie said. You did. Silas closed the door and set the bar. The sound landed with more weight than it had an hour before. He trimmed the wick and poured coffee, because work is how you keep victory from turning into noise. What now? Maribel asked. Now. We keep moving forward so we're hard to push back, Silas said. He brought a small cedar board and his awl. We won't name them yet, but we can mark the idea. He punched 3 neat dots along the edge and a line beneath that said together without saying it. Hattie tied on her scarf. Sheriff's due Saturday, she said. I'll meet him half a day out and walk him through his story so he doesn't step in Quinn's grammar. Quinn will hire louder men, Maribel said. Loud isn't strong, Silas said. A house is a line drawn and kept. The baby settled. Hattie left with her chin up and her horse sure-footed. Silas stacked wood by the hearth and set the kettle where it could think about boiling. He stood with his palm on the bar, feeling the grain say yes. Thank you, Maribel said. Not yet, Silas answered. Thank me when spring takes the road and doesn't give it back. She lifted the sling to kiss 3 small crowns. Then, I'll thank you every year. Snow kept faith with the ridge tonight still. Winter measured them without malice. Silas set tasks in rows where a body could follow without tripping. He cut wood to a length that fit the stove's mouth. He packed snow in the box outside so the melt would think in order. Maribel learned the stove's humor and the way steam takes pain out of bones when asked politely. The babies argued with hunger and sleep, and then agreed to both. The cabin kept the rhythm like a hymn nobody needed to rehearse. He carved small things on purpose. 2 spoons, a water ladle, a peg where a shawl could live. He planned another cedar shim, just because the table liked feeling tended. Maribel mended the blanket binding with neat, stubborn stitches and flushed at praise she didn't trust yet. Hattie came and went on her red scarf like punctuation, bringing cabbage, clean cloth, and the sort of news that feeds sense instead of fear. Storms chose their days. When the drifts rose to the window's sill, Silas tied a rope from porch to shed and fetched wood like a miner pulling truth out of a shaft. Maribel kept milk warm and babies warmer. She learned the sling Silas had tied until it moved like her own thinking. 3 small crowns breathed together and forgot that cold existed. Sometimes, when sleep sat right, Maribel spoke pieces of the before as if placing stones where a path had been. He wanted a son he could name after himself, she said once, the words dry as split cedar. He said daughters were squandered breath. Silas wiped the knife's edge and made a place for her sentence to land. Breath is never squandered, he said. Look at them proving it. They took turns believing. When her courage lagged, his didn't. When his patience thinned, hers spread over the thin place until it held. He showed her the spring under the aspen and how to gauge its honesty by how loud it ran under ice. She showed him how to bind a cracked hand with boiled linen so wood would not get what a child might. The ridge kept watch without fuss. Fox tracks stitched the drifts where rabbits had erred. The mule learned to stand in the lee of the cabin and pretend the wind admired him. A hawk hung over the bench and counted voles. Silence made a road between breaths. On a day when the light remembered it could be gold, Silas brought a cedar board to the table and the awl he kept finer than a parson's whiskers. I've been thinking of names, he said, not as a decree but as an offering. They'll need something solid for the world to push against. Maribel's hands found the babies without looking. I have been thinking too, she said. I want them not to share the weight of my old name. I want them to belong to their own sentences. Then let's write some, he said. They tried out syllables like boots, seeing what pinched and what promised to carry. Hattie arrived halfway through and leaned on the doorframe, grinning into her scarf. What are we naming besides a storm I see brewing on Quinn's face if he hears of it? Girls who owe him nothing, Maribel said, and did not tremble. Silas pressed the awl and made the letters slowly. Eloise, he said, because it held light without apology. Ruth, because the sound of it stands where it's put. June, because a month can live in a child and change the way a room breathes just by being there. Maribel tested each with her mouth. Eloise blinked as if a window had opened. Ruth made a fist like a gavel. June slept through the ceremony, with the serene arrogance of the very new. Yes, she said. Yes and yes. He burned the letters with a wire heated in the stove's blue heart. The room smelled of cedar and decision. Hattie dabbed her eyes and accused the smoke. That's settled, she said. I'll inform the choir. Silas hung the plaques on 3 pegs he set level by the bed. The babies did not care. They had their own work. Maribel cared. She traced the edges until her fingers learned the shape of hope. He brought a small mirror, turned it face to the wall, then asked before he turned it back. Look if you want, he said, or keep the day for other jobs. She faced it in her time and saw what she expected, a tired woman, but also what she had forgotten, a person who had lived through a sentence and was writing a finer one. They made a first supper that tasted like reprieve rather than rations. Potatoes thawed from the shed's false winter, cabbage sliced thin, fat rendered honest. Hattie set bread on the table as if it were paper a judge wanted to read. Silas poured coffee. Maribel blessed the cups without a prayer anyone could hear. After, when the babies slept in a tangle of small certainty, they sat with their hands around mugs and let quiet do the talking. A decent life, Silas said, is just skills put to tenderness. Maribel nodded. And telling the truth before fear can rewrite it. He whittled a toy lamb for Eloise because she stared at wool as if learning its alphabet. He stitched a soft ball for Ruth because she kicked as if to argue gravity. He tied a ribbon from Hattie's scrap bag on June's peg because even the calm deserves something that belongs only to them. Snow slid off the roof and surrendered. The ridge eased its shoulders. Somewhere, a drip started its arithmetic toward spring. They banked the fire and leaned into chairs that didn't wobble. For the first time since the wire, Maribel slept without gasping. Silas checked the latch, laid his palm to the bar, and felt the grain answer, yes. Names on pegs, warm stones, at the bed's foot. A mirror turned the right way. Winter had measured them and found them equal to the weight. The sky closed its fist over the pass. Silas felt it first in the way the mule lifted his head and argued the bit, and then in the air, thin, metallic, a coin lay on the tongue. Clouds pressed shoulder to shoulder above the ridge until light went the color of pewter. He stacked wood within a hand's reach of the stove and tied a rope from porch to shed, knots at intervals to count without seeing. Maribel eased the sling to her lap and checked 3 small chests for the steady rise. A mother trusts more than clocks. Eloise made a noise that said the world had not asked her permission. Ruth kicked the ribbon Silas had tied. June slept with dignity. Hattie arrived with snow on her scarf like scattered flour. "Quinn bought speed," she said, breath white. 4 men on fresh sorrels and a sleigh with bells wrapped in cloth so sound won't tattle. He told the store he's riding for what's his bylaw. "Law doesn't need to be loud," Silas answered. "It needs to be true." "Sheriff's 2 valleys out," Hattie said. "I'll go drag him by his better ear." Maribel's hands tightened around the bar until Wood admitted her claim. "He'll use the storm for cover." "Then we'll be twice as clear," Silas said. "Hattie, ride for Hale and the sheriff. Tell them Quinn left a woman wired and 3 infants on the snow, then came with paper thin enough to see daylight. Tell them the ridge remembers. If they want to make history worth hearing, they'll arrive with irons and a decent pen." Hattie nodded, eyes bright. "I'll carry that sentence," she said, and was gone. The wind changed argument and found a sharper one. Snow started in honest flakes and then decided on work. Silas set the house to what was coming. He hung a lantern low behind the stove to throw a false glow, laid a dummy in the bed, oat balled under the quilt, hat where a head might be. He warmed stones and tucked them there to fool a hand that tested. He stacked 2 straw sacks and tied them in the sling, the weight right for decoy. From a scrap of calico he shaped small knots that would look like hands in bad light. He scattered ashes on the floor where tracks would make lies. Maribel watched and learned the grammar of defense. "Where do we split the path?" she asked. "Fence, to the willow clump," he said, tracing the air. "Cut down to Creek Hollow where the drift breaks. Carry no lantern. Keep to the left bank, where willow roots hold. Hattie will leave a scarf on the sheriff's post if she finds it quickly. If not, follow the creek to Lorimer's. No heroics, only accuracy. And you?" "I stay noisy," he said. "Noise loves a fool. I can play that long enough." Did the plane work? Milk warmed at the stove's back, cloth folded in thirds, honey tucked in a corked vial. She wrapped each girl in flannel, then in the extra piece Hattie had brought because love is a redundancy on purpose. Eloise, Ruth, June, she said them in order, a tally against fear. He wrote on a cedar scrap with a pencil cut short. Joseph Quinn, abandonment with intent to kill. Attempted kidnapping, hired men, witnesses, Hattie Lorimer, Silas Granger, Maribel. He put it in his pocket and then under the lamp where any soul with a hat could read the day correctly. Wind found the door and tested its fit. The bar said no. The stove took its own side and hummed. "You're coming with me," he had said on the bench. Now he said, "Go and come back." That's the same promise said 2 ways. Maribel lifted the sling, set 2 lower and 1 high so all 3 could hear the same heart. "If the trail lies, I'll make a new one," she said. "Trust the left bank," he reminded. "Creek keeps its word better there." He pulled his coat and cinched the collar. He checked the rifle, the pistol, and the hatchet he meant to let them see. He hung the bell string on the back hinge and thumbed it once to hear the small, decisive note. "Say the rule," she said, "because a rule read aloud stands straighter. Tell the truth before fear can rewrite it," he said. "We'll write it in snow," she answered, "and have the sheriff read it in ink." A gust struck the north wall. The cabin answered like a tree with deep roots. Silas opened the door to the width of a promise and let the storm see a man who had already chosen. He stepped out into a white that erased edges and then redrew them as if the ridge were a schoolmaster with a stern hand. Maribel waited for the wind's breath to falter. When the drift leaned, she slipped through the side. The rope found her hand. She moved the fence to willow to hollow. Small steps counted by the sling. Eloise fussed. Ruth set her jaw. June slept as if she had signed a treaty with the weather. Silas moved opposite, slow where a fool would hurry, lamp in hand, hat high, a silhouette for greed. He left tracks broad and deliberate around the dummy, bed, then out the front and along the barn to say, "See, look, over here." He raised a shout that turned in the snow like a lost dog and came back to heel. The ridge closed around his sound. Somewhere below, a sleigh bell clinked against its gag like a prisoner reminding iron of its nature. Men's voices came torn and patched by wind. One laugh tried swagger and became a cough. He set the bench where a shoulder would hit, loosened, a hinge screw enough to squeak, and laid the wet sack ready for the fire a fool always throws. He breathed like a man who meant to keep breathing. Behind him, the door knew the bar, and the bar knew the grain, and the grain knew his hand. Ahead, the storm made mercy out of distance. Maribel was already part of that mercy, moving low along the left bank where willow root holds. Hattie would be a red mark against white, then a line, then a law with a horse. Silas stood where a house needs its man and kept his promise to be noisy. Snow ate footprints faster than men could make them. Silas kept the lamp moving where a fool would, hat high against the white, a shape for greed to follow. Wind drove needles sidewise. The ridge gave back only the answers it trusted. At the door, the bell string hummed once and forgot. They came out of the cottonwoods with cloth-wrapped bells and a sleigh that wanted to sing. Joseph Quinn rode front, fur collar up, anger polished to a gentleman's shine. Two men flanked with rifles, another hunched at the runners with a pry bar. "Granger," Joseph called, voice clipped. "I'll have what's mine. Open and be done." "This door opens for people, not property," Silas said. A man at the runners pried the latch with a finger. The hinge squealed as Silas meant it to. The bench met the shoulder and sent him to his knees. The wet sack kissed the fire bottle and slapped it harmless into drift. "Your papers are tinder," Silas said. "Try the stove if you must." Joseph smiled without liking the taste. "Law rides with me." "It rides behind you," Silas answered. A rifle creaked at the north window. Silas slipped to the jam, counted wind, and put a warning shot into the post outside. "Break it," Joseph said. "End the farce." The pry bar bit the plank and came away with splinters. Silas let them hear his boots, then fell silent so the house could talk. Lamp low behind the stove, the dummy breathing heat. Ashes scuffed where tracks lied. Cedar scrap on the table naming sins in pencil. "Granger." The name went thin. "You're hiding a woman who owes me." "Men owe hunger and weather," Silas said. "Nobody owes you." He lifted the latch a hair and spoke through a crack. "Bring the sheriff and read the snow. Until then, ride on." "Or what?" Joseph snarled. "Or you'll limp explaining." "Your day," Silas said and dropped the bar. The sound put Winter on his side. A shot tore the door skin deep. Bleed struck the dummy's hat and learned about straw. Silas moved again, heel to board, counting breath. He shot the pry bar's handguard. The iron jumped. The bulky man yelped and reeled. "Enough," Joseph hissed. "Kindle him." A second. Bottle arced. Silas swatted it back. Flame ran up snow and died. He slipped to the lean-to, boots careful. The mule blew recognition and settled. Silas unpinned the back window he had loosened and slid into the dark between house and barn where sound learns humility. Down in Creek Hollow, Maribel moved like a sentence said under breath. Left bank, willow root, step small, then smaller. The sling held two low, one high, 3 small hearts beat a chord into her ribs. She counted scarf knots, 1 at the fence, 2 at the clump, 3 for the drop to the hollow. Wind argued. She took its truth and ignored its noise. Hattie's red came out of the white like a signature. "Here," she said, taking a strap of the sling with hands that had hauled more than hymnals. "Step where I step." "The sheriff?" Maribel asked. "On the north grade," Hattie said. 2 cowboys with him. We'll find his good ear." Swale willow curl of creek that remembered summer. At the cottonwood snag, Hattie looped her scarf high. "He'll see," she said. "Keep to the left bank, the right lies." Back at the cabin. A man reached the unpinned window and pushed his muzzle through. Silas let him choose the mistake, then pinned the arm with the hatchets flat and wrapped the wrist once. Clean. The pistol fell and vanished in the snow. The arm withdrew profanity. Joseph's voice lost polish. "Drag him out." "Send your invoice," Silas said, and knocked the sleigh's cross-tree so the team shifted and shouldered its traces across a man's shins. Men cursed. "Read the table before you wreck the door," Silas said. "It'll save you a ride to Boswell." "What table?" someone muttered. He peered through the crack and saw cedar with pencil words. Abandonment, attempted murder, hired. Men down canyon, the sheriff's bell horse sounded once, free of any gag. A lantern bobbed in the white. Hattie lifted her scarf and answered with red. Maribel set her back to the willow and breathed for 4. Silas heard the bell and let a little of his breath go. "You wanted law," he called. "It's learning your name." Wind shoved one last time and discovered the cabin had roots. Joseph's. Men drew in on themselves like fire without fat. The door waited for a hand that had a right to it. Silas reset the latch and rested his palm on the bar, steady as noon. Outside, hoofbeats gathered into sense. He had kept them long enough. Now, the ridge could witness, let them come. The ridge brought the sheriff like a fact. Lanterns bobbed out of the white where Hattie's scarf burned red against the drift. The bell horse shook off snow and let sound be sound again. A broad-shouldered man in a plain coat swung down, not fast, not slow, a pace that put weight under words. 2 cowboys ranged behind him, not looking to be dramatic, only ready. "Sheriff," Hattie said, breath thin, "read this place true before you hear him talk." He did, the way men who have lasted in hard country do. 1 look for the door, 1 for the stove, 1 for the faces. He caught the kerosene shine in a splash that hadn't taken, the straw hat on the decoy pillow, the cedar scrap on the table, pencil marks dark and square. He smelled anger and snow and milk, and he trusted the order of those scents. "Whose house?" he asked. "Mine," Silas said from behind the bar, steady as noon. "Silas Granger. The woman is Maribel. The babies are 3. The man outside calls paper law and wants them like freight." The sheriff nodded once. "Mr. Quinn," he said to the white, "if you intend to speak, put both boots on ground that'll hold you." Joseph Quinn eased his sleigh up, fur collar rich against the storm. He lifted a packet as if it could part the snow. "Affidavit," he said, "contract, mark of ownership." His smile was the kind that keeps a mirror to practice on. "Bring it here," the sheriff said. "I'll see if it can stand." Hattie moved to the door and opened a polite inch. Wind tried to argue. The bar explained manners. Quinn passed, the packet through with fingers that liked to be obeyed. The sheriff broke the wax with no ceremony at all. He read the first line, then the last. He turned the sheet to the light. "This isn't a court seal," he said. "It's a store ledger, stamp pressed through soot to look official. Words are tidy, truth isn't here. It's good enough," Joseph said. "Ask the judge." "I will," the sheriff answered, "but I can ask the snow, too." He tipped his chin toward the drift. "Harlan," he called to the older of Quinn's men, "what did you see on the bench today?" Harlan shifted in his saddle, hat low against shame. "Woman wired to a corner post," he said. 3 babies at her feet. I cut the wire off her wrists. The boss told us to leave 'em to teach a lesson. We did not tie. We did not untie after. That's the truth I can carry." The sheriff did not sigh. "Rifles down," he told the riders. Hands where hands belong, you—" He pointed at the man with the pry bar nursing a bruised wrist. "Step back before this house explains itself again." Joseph's smile cracked. "Sheriff, you overstep." "I step where the ground is decent," the sheriff said. He tapped the cedar scrap with a forefinger big as an axe handle. "Abandonment with intent to kill, attempted kidnapping, arson if the bottles had been taken. Those are charges, Mr. Quinn, written and signed by people who can hold a pencil and a memory. Your paper's a costume." Maribel came out of the willow shadow then, Hattie guiding her the last yards, sling high and low, 3 small crowns tucked like truth against her. Snow made a cape of her shawl. She lifted her chin not to invite pity or provoke rage, only to get her words out clean. "Joseph wired me to a post for bearing daughters," she said. "He left me and Eloise and Ruth and June to die." The sheriff's eyes gentled at the babies' names and hardened at the man who had made them necessary. "Miss Maribel," he said, the title chosen with care, "you and the children are under my protection by law and by the sort of decency that doesn't need law to act. Step inside, warm them." Joseph's glove twitched toward his coat where a small bad idea hid. The closest cowboy saw it. So did Hattie. "Don't," she said, shovel in hand like punctuation. Joseph left his hand where it could be counted. "Irons," the sheriff said. His men moved like people who knew how to do a thing once. Metal clicked. Joseph found out what a hinge feels like when it has to listen. "You cannot," he began. "I can," the sheriff said. "Because a judge reads what I send and not what you wave. And because every woman from here to Powder River will make my coffee sour if I do otherwise." He looked to Silas. "Any shot fired from your side after I say this?" "Only warnings," Silas said. The fire went back into the snow. The pry bar learned manners. The sheriff allowed himself the ghost of a grin. "I heard the lesson." He raised his voice enough for the white to carry it up and down the draw. "By the authority of this county and the people whose names are not for sale, Joseph Quinn is under arrest. His hired men are witnesses or accomplices. They can choose which by sundown." Harlan let his rifle down until the barrel met the boot. "Witness," he said. The pry bar man followed, eyes avoiding Maribel. The third rider found his courage in Hattie's shovel and put his gun on the sleigh as if it had burned him. "Now," the sheriff said, softer, to the room that had done so much more than hold heat, "I'll need statements once these little ones stop needing their mother every breath. I'll leave 2 horses and a boy at your door. I'll ride Quinn to Hale's safe and send for Boswell. The rest waits for a day when wind isn't doing the writin'." Maribel stepped over the threshold. The stove lifted its small song and handed it to the babies. Hattie tugged off snow-stiff mittens and reached for Ruth because her hands knew how. Silas set the kettle forward and made room for the law at his table like a host who'd always planned on it. Outside, the ridge exhaled. The sleigh bells stopped pretending not to be bells. The snow that had eaten footprints began very slowly to record a different kind of track. Silas stood with his palm on the bar and felt the grain agree. He looked at Maribel and at the 3 names he had burned into cedar and thought of the sentence that had brought them all here. "You're coming with me." Tonight it meant you're staying. Tomorrow it might mean we, together, go on. The sheriff tipped his hat as he went, the gesture small and plain as a period at the end of a true line. Justice traveled on slow wheels. The sheriff left with irons and a promise to return when paper could stand beside the snow and not blush. By morning, the wind lost its temper. Light came back softer. Hattie brewed coffee. She and Silas told the story in turns while Maribel fed the girls and remembered how to breathe between cries. Near noon, the sheriff returned with Hale's ledger, Poole's seal, and a wagon for witnesses. He read what would be written later, each charge spelled like iron: abandonment with intent to kill, attempted kidnapping, assault, forgery. Harlan signed. The pry bar man made his mark and did not meet Maribel's eyes. Joseph spoke from the jail wagon. The sheriff shut the window and let silence settle. "Do you want the circuit judge to take your statement here or at the church?" he asked Maribel. "Here," she said, looking at the stove, bed, and bar. This room tells the part I'd forget under rafters where I was married. 2 days later, the judge arrived, listened, and wrote without showing. When he rose, he set his hand on Silas's cedar scrap and nodded once, the way a man does when a line lands square. Neighbors arrived as a pattern, flower, thread, a cradle. They asked for nothing, which is how a town asks forgiveness for what it almost believed. Silas turned the table sideways and chalked a new wall where none existed. "We'll take this north corner out," he said. "Add a room wide enough for beds, milk, and the sigh a mother lets go when the stove holds." Hattie turned measurements into errands. "I'll fetch hinges that don't squeal and a pane to make morning honest," she said. The first cut tasted like treason until light pushed through and made a new rule. Boards gave, pegs moved, space grew. Silas built the hearth forward, stone, over stone, until it needed a name. Maribel found her feet in the work. She sorted nails, kept water hot, and fed the three according to their temper. Eloise wanting to talk, Ruth certainty, June peace. She watched Silas set a sill and shim it true, and saw the patience in him that does not ask thanks. At dusk, the sheriff returned, snow-dusted and tired. Quinn's men chose witness. Boswell denied bail. Hale's ledger is useful now. "I'll need you both in town next week to sign what today already knows." "We'll come," Silas said. After he left, the house breathed more deeply. Maribel stood at the new opening where tomorrow would live. "I thought safety was a hallway with doors locked at both ends," she said. "Now I think it may be a room that keeps growing." "It's a fire with enough chairs," Silas said. "A decent life is skills put to tenderness." She looked at the 3 pegs with their names burned right and then at him. "What do you call this place?" He turned the cedar scrap and wrote, with a pencil stub, "The Hearth at Granger Ridge." He held it toward her with both hands. She read and nodded like someone placing a stone in a wall. "Let it be that." Work went on. Cross sent plank. Lark sent muslin. Poole brought a small blank book. "Write what you choose," he said, "and let the world adjust." When the roof frame stood and the new window caught a square of daylight wider than any they had owned, Silas let his thoughts be plain. "Maribel," he said carefully, "I won't hurry you. But I mean to keep you and these 3 with me, not as charge but as choice. If you stay, I'll carry the heavy end of the load as long as hands are given me." She set her palm on the way. Newstone felt its heat, looked at the barn window, touched Eloise's brow, Ruth's fist, June's cheek. Then she found his sleeve. "I won't wear the name that hurt me," she said. "But I know the one who kept me alive. If we pledge anything today, let it be this. We choose this house, these girls, this ridge, and the work that keeps them honest. If more is to be said later, we'll say it standing." He breathed like a man setting down a weight. "Then we are agreed," he said. "We'll sign it first in habits." Hattie wiped her eyes and accused the dust. "That'll sing," she said. "I'll give it to the choir." Night came with a gentler hand. The stove ticked pride into iron. The babies slept in a row like commas, keeping the line honest. Outside, snow let go of the eaves one soft sheet at a time. Inside, a man and a woman stood by a hearth they had argued into being and made a pledge that did not need paper to live. Spring came with mud and mercy. The drift stepped back from the aspens and the creek found its voice under the bank. Silas took down the rope between the porch and the shed and coiled it for the next argument. Winter would start and lose. The sheriff rode up plain, drank coffee, and said the judge had read the snow and the cedar scrap and found them persuasive. Joseph Quinn would face his seasons behind a door that did not listen when he knocked. They are set to finish the hearth at Granger Ridge. Silas lifted the lintel, while Hattie held the post with the calm of someone who never asked permission to be useful. Maribel stitched curtains that let morning in without a draft. Eloise watched the needle. Ruth kicked the table leg on the beat. June smiled at the stove. Neighbors brought beams and modest jokes. Hale came with terms that didn't have teeth. By May, the new room kept its own weather. Travelers learned the path. A drover with frostbite. Ears thawed enough to remember his manners. 2 schoolgirls sat by the hearth and found courage again. A widow from over the divide was left with a jar of broth and the idea that mornings could be trusted. The door bar turned into a ritual, set at night, lifted at dawn. Color returned because Maribel let it. She painted one wall, creek stone pale, and the small one the green you see only when snow admits defeat. Silas carved 3 lambs into the pegs beneath the name plaques, and a 4th on the doorframe. He burned a sign and hung it where a traveler could see it from the trail. Some evenings the Ridge asked for silence and they paid in full. Some Sundays, Wise the Square asked for faces, and they went when it helped other people choose. Hattie sang like weather, steady, necessary. When townsfolk tried to thank with more words than the day could carry, Silas pointed at the stove and said, "It does most of the talking." One afternoon, while June slept and Ruth plotted the undoing of a ball of yarn, Eloise reached for a square of light on the floor and laughed out loud. The sound lifted the room like a window. Maribel leaned against the door jamb and let her eyes close around the miracle of ordinary joy. Later, she wrote in Poole's book, "We choose this house every day and it chooses us back." When the fence needed mending higher on the slope, Silas set posts with the patience he used on flour, soup, and hinges. Maribel learned the creeks, summer paths, and where willow bark grows bitter enough to matter. They tended travelers, then calves, then the small pride of a garden that believed them. They slept when they could and forgave each other the rest. Privately, with wind for witness, they spoke vows under the cottonwood. She wore no veil. He wore the shirt that forgives bad dancing. He gave her a ring braided from cedar and rawhide. She gave him a knot around his wrist that meant come home. They promised what hands can keep. Truth before fear, work before noise. The bar set each night and lifted each morning. This Ridge kept honest. Word traveled without shouting. Travelers left coins and small stories on the shelf by the door. Children learned the girls' names in order and then backward. The mule quit lying about his age. The wind tried the eaves and found them better braced than last year. The sheriff tipped his hat and kept riding. First frost silvered the grass. Eloise pointed and declared it pretty in a language of her own. Ruth tried to catch it and learned about melting. June tucked her hands under her chin and regarded Winter like an old acquaintance who had remembered his manners. The house held steady. The Ridge did what ridges do. Keep. Maribel counted 3 steady breaths and smiled like a woman who had outrun a sentence. "This story made history," Hattie said one evening by the stove. "Not the kind that gets printed, the kind that changes how a place breathes." She tugged her red scarf tight and stepped into a night that no longer felt dangerous, only honest. Silas set his palm on the bar and felt the grain say yes as it had on the first night and every night since. Maribel lifted the girls into their cradle, 1, 2, then 3 again. They banked the fire, turned the lamp low, and let the dark be a neighbor instead of a threat. Tomorrow would have chores. After that, more of the same. They were rich in work and in each other. If you'd like more clean cinematic frontier romances like this, tap subscribe and like, so the next story finds you first. Thanks for riding.